Episode 25, Val Ries, Executive Muse.
I'm humbly going to admit that my favorite mistake and my biggest mistake was my first time in a leadership position, which was in college.
I'm Mark Graben. This is my favorite mistake. In this podcast, you'll hear business leaders and other really interesting people talking about their favorite mistakes. Because we all make mistakes, but what matters is learning from our mistakes instead of repeating them over and over again. So this is the place for honest reflection and conversation, personal growth, and professional success. Visit our website at myfavoritemistakepodcast.com. Since this is episode 25, you can find show notes and more at markgraven.com/mistake25. Thanks for listening, and now on with the show. Well, hi, welcome to My Favorite Mistake. I'm Mark Graven. Our guest today is Val Ries. She is a leadership trainer. She's an executive coach. She's a nurse by background with an MBA, and as her LinkedIn description says, she describes herself as a management muse, and her firm is called Executive Muse. So Val, first off, thank you for being a guest here on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Mark. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear your story. But first off, the word muse caught my interest. So to you, what does that word mean? Why does that resonate with you in terms of the work that you do?
Yeah. Well, I think of a muse, for some reason I have this image of a bunch of people hiking a mountain, like a 14er, and the muse is the person that might even be behind them and letting them lead the way. So the muse is sometimes getting out of the background. They are encouraging from behind, and they're letting the people make the decision. So I think that's what I think of when I think of a muse, is someone that just inspires us to be the best we can be. And sometimes that's failing and allowing the failure to happen.
So when it comes to failures or mistakes, or however we want to frame that, maybe that's a good segue to our usual leadoff question. Val, what's your favorite mistake?
Yeah, I was actually really excited when I saw this question because I'm humbly going to admit that my favorite mistake and my biggest mistake was my first time in a leadership position, which was in college. I was president of my sorority, and I had about 70 women from between the ages of 18 to 21 that I was responsible for, and I didn't really know what I was doing, Mark. That was my first time as a leader, and I just really messed it up.
So what happened? Or what did?
Okay, so this story sticks out. In the beginning of the year, we have a retreat, and we try to go away with all of the women as like a team bonding experience. And I asked the committee that was in charge of this retreat to plan like a camping, trust circle rope course retreat. And then it was the summer, and I decided to go on my merry way that summer and go backpacking in Europe and leave the committee to do its thing. And when I come back, they did not plan this retreat in the woods, in the wilderness. They planned a trip to Atlantic City instead.
Mm.
I was frustrated.
Yeah.
I was really. I had a responsibility to ensure the safety of all these women. Plus, we had a board of alumni that also needed to approve these types of events, and they were not going to approve a trip to Atlantic City where there was alcohol and gambling, things like that. So I had to tell the committee that, hey, what happened to following my orders, and what happened to this cabin and retreat, and we can't do this thing in Atlantic City. And they were very mad at me that I didn't just go with the flow, that I didn't allow it. Yeah. So it turned into a mess, Mark, a big mess. And what ensued after that was a bit of a lot of gossip of how I was mean, or that I wasn't cool, or whatever, you say when you're that age. And instead of going to Atlantic City, we wound up in a hotel, basically renting rooms, and the overall mood was very grim, and there were silos, and there was a lot of people that were divided, like almost like pro-Val, anti-Val, and I didn't know what to do. And so I just did what I thought was best, and I got everybody into a room and started yelling at them. And just told them how disappointed I was and how they're acting ridiculous, and it really backfired, and it was not a technique that worked at all.
Yeah.
So I would say that's my favorite mistake, because it taught me a lot about leadership at a very young age.
Sure. Well, and I mean, to be fair, I mean, what you're describing is, I think the growing pains that most any leader goes through as we're trying to find our leadership style, or a leadership style. And, we learn by making mistakes. I've kind of similar stories come to mind. So, I would say, don't beat yourself up too badly here for what happened there. The key thing maybe we can explore a little bit, are the lessons learned. As did you adjust your style during that year as sorority president, or were those lessons that kind of stayed with you as you then eventually got out into the workplace, into leadership roles?
Yeah, unfortunately, time was kind of up, and I graduated, and I always felt this pit in my stomach that I couldn't unify a group, and that I had somehow just did things wrong. So the lessons came later when I was promoted into my first management role, and a group of 10 that I was leading. And I learned things and reflected on the way that first experience was, to ensure that I wasn't doing the same thing. Because I see it all the time. My clients talk to me about how, they don't like their boss because their boss is not approachable, or they don't feel valued at work, and those sorts of things. So the lessons came later. Yeah.
And, I think of role models that I had in my first job out of college. Many of those leaders would have also defined leadership as giving orders. As, you used that phrase. And, I saw how that was troublesome in different ways. And thankfully then I had some role models, who showed different leadership styles.
Yeah.
So I'm curious how your views evolved kind of, through experience or seeing other examples of leadership, of, the difference between giving orders and being more of a coach, or, to use your word, being a muse that inspires employees.
Yeah. And of course, like, as I went on to work in the corporate world, I mean, even as a nurse, I saw doctors that were mean and just gave orders, and intimidated nurses. And I saw doctors that were really easy to work with, and you weren't so afraid to say the wrong thing or make a mistake. And then when I got into the corporate world, I worked for wonderful leaders and not so wonderful leaders. I came to remind myself what it is that people crave from a leader. I even roll out this acronym in the book and in my trainings. And I think it comes down to these 5 things. They crave connection. They want to know that leader is unifying people, that they're part of a team, they're part of something bigger than themselves. They crave reliability. They want to know their leader is going to show up and not disappear for 6 weeks on a backpacking trip in Europe and leave them. They crave appreciation. They want to know that you value what they say and that you acknowledge their hard work. They want to be valued. They want to know that they're part of the organization, that they're bringing value, that you recognize that. And then the last thing is they crave effective communication. And I think all 5 of those things were missing in my leadership style. And I started to write down like all the things that I enjoyed in all the leaders, and what was it? What were those characteristics? And this idea of Crave came to me. It's like, this is what employees are craving. Like, we need to give them more of these things. They're valued assets. Yeah. I hope they feel this way with my leadership.
Yeah. Well, and you talk about being out of communication. I guess if we're thinking ahead to more recent or the next sorority president who comes in and has to figure out how to be a leader, it's harder to disconnect and be unreachable for 6 weeks. Maybe some people crave that when they have a chance to get away for a trip in the future. But it sounds like some of the other approaches or something where it would be helpful, or I guess my question for you is, like, what could be done? I'm not asking you, if you were doing it, but thinking about the next incoming sorority president, like what kind of resources could be available to sort of teach someone how to be a sorority president? Or I wonder if there's leadership coaching that's provided from like a national sorority perspective. Just wondering.
For me at that time, there wasn't. Maybe it's different now, maybe it was specific to my sorority, but there wasn't really anyone for me to talk to that could give me that coaching. But I mean, gosh, you could walk through this model and just ask them the questions. Like, how do you think you can unify people? What do you think they're looking for from you? A lot of empathy and putting yourself in their shoes. And what would it take to be reliable and to appreciate people and to acknowledge people? And what unifies people? What's the purpose you guys are serving? Have them share these ideas. And then what does it look like to effectively communicate and give continuous updates and reminders? Even just little things like celebrating people's birthdays or academic accomplishments. I mean, these are all things that bring a community of people together and let each other know that you care about each other, right? Yeah. So I would ask that sorority president to listen better and listen more and listen with an open mind and acknowledge people and ensure that even if they don't agree with their perspective, that it's okay to say, hey, that's a great idea. Let's open it up to some other ideas and see what's best, versus like, no, we're not doing that. That's not going to work, right? Yeah.
I mean, thinking back to you telling the story, it sounds like your response wasn't one of asking, well, tell me where this Atlantic City idea came from, or why do you think that's a better alternative, or trying to ask questions to understand. You came back and said, no, that wasn't the plan.
Yeah. I was mad because they didn't follow my orders, So I let them know that I was angry with them and that I was disappointed and discouraged. And that just makes people bite back. There's a way to do it. There's a way to communicate in a healthy way.
Sure.
And I didn't have the tools for that. Yeah.
I mean, I think there's a couple of workplace issues that come to mind. Maybe you've seen other challenges or maybe good things happening where frontline employee, like, I work with hospitals a lot. It could be a nurse. They're now made nurse manager, and they're more or less told, they may get a class about taking care of payroll or something very tactical like that. But other than that, it might be a matter of, okay, go figure it out, right? And maybe that nurse had a good role model as a nurse manager. Maybe the director that they're reporting to is a good role model, maybe not. But yeah, I mean, that's a tough position where, someone gets a formal leadership role and is kind of left to their own, as opposed to organizations that are more intentional about helping provide some structure and making clear, what mindsets or what behaviors are most effective in the organization. Not that we're going to turn every manager or leader into a carbon copy, but it seems like more structure can quite often be more helpful. What do you think? What's your experience?
I think so many individual contributors are thrown into leadership roles. And they were driven and ambitious, and they hit their sales quota, or they got good customer service reviews, and then the company says, oh, okay, you're an A player, you have a lot of great qualities, go be a leader. And then they don't know, no one's teaching. I mean, some of it's innate and intuitive, and like you said, you look at your role model, but it's so common. It's I see it everywhere. And I guess in one way I'm fortunate because it keeps my business alive. But in another way, I wish there was more foundational things that organizations would do to set these leaders and the employees up for success. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So
I think that's a really good way of putting it. Are we setting people up for success? Mm-hmm. As opposed, and it doesn't mean everybody will succeed, but I think when there's more intention around developing frontline leaders, it's more likely to lead to a good outcome instead of a kind of sink or swim 50-50 or whatever the odds might be. And if someone can't hack it, they'll get frustrated and go back to nursing. Well, that might be lost potential for that leader and for the organization.
Yeah. And, a lot of this comes down to communication. I mean, and if there's some sort of conflict or disconnect, we can get passive, or we don't know what to say. We get conflict avoidant, and we don't want to address things. And then if we address things, will the other person become defensive? And no one's giving us the tools on how to handle this. And then maybe I shouldn't say no one. I mean, there's a lot of organizations that actually do give some training, but I would say it's the exception, not the rule. Yeah. And also, like, Mark, we weren't taught in grade school how to have effective communication, right? Like that it would have been so great to learn that at that age. Yeah. Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
You're getting in a fight with a friend or your disagreement with your parent. It's like, hey, here's how to have this conversation in the way that's going to move it forward in an impactful way.
Yeah, those soft skills, if you will, and people skills. And I mean, I think my background originally as an engineer. Engineering schools have focused a lot more on helping people be effective working in teams and communicating and leading, and instead of just relying on building individual technical expertise. So that's probably a good evolution of engineering education, I would think. But,
yes, I agree.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit more about the work that you do through your firm, Executive Muse. As a leadership trainer, as an executive coach, what types of situations do you get called in to help people with?
Yeah, I would say typically it's the executive calling. So it's usually a director or a VP. Or a marketing officer that is frustrated with some of the challenges they're having within their team. So this could be lack of communication, attrition, they're losing people, they can't find and retain good talent. Maybe there's some insubordination, or the leader just feels like the leaders that they have under them are not as impactful and effective as they could be, and they want to give them some of those tools. So that's when they call me in. I work with the executive to understand their vision, where it is now and where they would love it to go. And then we customize training to know exactly, like, okay, let's start with this class, and then let's add it and enhance it with this class. And some companies then also choose to have the coaching as a complement to the trainings to really ensure that habits are changing and cultures are changing. And I see that. happening. I see the transformation happening. So it's really fun.
Well, cool. And it seems like any sort of personal transformation or change as a leader requires some coaching and support and reinforcement. It's not enough to sit in a class and kind of take something in through the ears and say, "Oh, right, yeah, I've developed new habits overnight." It's a struggle for people, to be fair to them, I think, right?
It is, and I try to build the training so there's a lot of self-reflection happening and areas for them to write and get their thoughts out, because I think that's part of just the reinforcing of the learning. So you're not just listening to somebody talk for a few hours.
Right.
But then what happens is, like, let's say I'm teaching a class on how to have effective conversations. everyone learns the tips, and then they turn to their partner and they share and they talk it out. But then when we coach, it's like, okay, tell me exactly what's going on with this person. What's this person's personality? What are all your frustrations about this personality? It can really get into their world and understand, and then alleviate all that in an hour and give them all the confidence and tools to have an effective conversation right away. And it's beautiful to watch people come back and say, my relationship with this person was not good at all. And within one conversation, it completely changed my relationship. So it does enhance it.
Yeah.
Coaching.
Yeah. So I also want to ask you about your book. So April 2021, Chief Inspiration Officer.
Yeah.
Tell us about, I always love asking authors, like, what was the inspiration for writing the book, and what, why it's a big accomplishment. It's a lot of effort. So what's the story behind the book?
Yeah. I've been in business for 7 years and teaching these classes, and the students in the class kept saying, is there a book we can read on what you're teaching? And I'm all about recommending other people's books. I think it's great. Mm-hmm. But about 3 years ago, I thought, I really need to put all the stuff I'm teaching into a book. It took me 3 years to write it.
Yeah.
And it's a labor of love. I had no idea how long that would take, but it's in the publisher's hands, and they are looking at an April 2021 release. So I'm super excited.
Yeah. So, and who do you think the target reader is? Leaders in any sort of organization, or who do you think it's best situated? Who's the book best suited for?
The early reviews that are coming back feel like it's anyone in a leadership role. Mm-hmm. I know that's very broad. My examples tend to drive more towards sales leaders, because when I left nursing, I went into medical sales and then was promoted into various management positions with that. But I think any leader that is looking to unify a team and ensure that they're thriving and that they're getting the most out of their people, and they want to build a top performing team, would be able to use the practical advice in here. Yeah.
Thinking back to your time writing, or everything involved in producing the book, were there any lessons learned, writing mistakes or book design mistakes that you would pass along to other authors? Yeah.
Oh, such a good question, because it ties back into your podcast topic, right?
Yeah, I can't help it.
Yeah, you can't help it, Mark. That's funny. I remember the first year I had a writing coach. He just kept saying, just get it out, get it out, get it out. And I was so afraid to say the wrong thing or to express something in the wrong way. And I was afraid that it wasn't going to be impactful. And I was just holding myself back from just saying what I wanted to say and getting these stories out in an authentic way. And I think that was a mistake, because it dragged on the process longer. Nothing's perfect in life. We're not perfect, and maybe we'll say it wrong, but if it could just help one person, if it can make a difference for that one person, then you say it, and maybe it'll help people be more open or more authentic. But I had to get over that fraud complex. Who am I to write a book? All that insecurity. Yeah. It was part of my journey.
Yeah. But I'm glad you've navigated that. And like you said, it's in the publisher's hands, and be available in a couple of months. So that's
right. That's right. And I'm offering a free chapter on my website. So
people can get that now?
They can, yeah.
Oh, great.
You can go to my website, executive-muse.com, and they can download the free chapter, and I'll send it to you. And they get a sneak peek. And I did the first chapter because it really summarizes the mindset of the entire book. And I think it's great to just get started with that. Yeah.
Well, great. Well, I hope people will check that out. So our guest has been Val Ries. The word muse, has been it's an interesting word to think about. And as you said earlier, Val, of inspiring others, writing a book about inspiration that'll inspire others. That sounds great. So congratulations in advance. Well, for one, congratulations on getting the book wrapped up. One mistake I think I made at one point as an author was being afraid to say, okay, that's enough. Because you could keep working on it forever, or at least there's a risk or tendency to do that, I think, sometimes.
I absolutely agree with you on that. I'm still doing it. Like seeing the final edits. I'm like, oh, you change this and tweak this. And it's like, I'll never launch this book. I just need to go with it. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you got past holding yourself back to write it, and that it's on its way out into the world. So, Val, thank you again for being a guest, for sharing your story about early leadership experiences, and most importantly, what you've learned from that going forward. So I really appreciate it, and thanks again.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks for having me, and I enjoyed connecting with you.
Thanks for listening. I hope this podcast inspires you to pause and think about your own favorite mistake and how learning from mistakes shapes you personally and professionally. If you're a leader, what can you do to create a culture where it's safe for colleagues to talk openly about mistakes in the spirit of learning? Please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. Our website is myfavoritemistakepodcast.com. See you next time.